I hear them coming near, their heart it beats with fear. They say my name in shame. My words they were abused, my healing they misused, and now I stand accused. They came to light the flame, they came to watch me hang and burn my gifts away. But once the smoke's removed, my body's been abused, my soul is watching you. My sisters, we have come, the old and ancient ones, return to bring anew. We won't go in your flame, no, none of us will hang. Our voices we reclaim. The burned witches come, gather everyone, and hear what we do say.
Welcome to Burnt Witches, a limited series podcast where history rises from the ashes and comes back to you in a modern way. Here we discuss all things labeled magic, esoteric, spiritual, or the modern broad label woo. Looking to dispel myths, we will meet brave souls who came here to help, heal, and educate. But first, let's take a step back in time with a few facts. On December 5th, 1484, Pope Innocent VII issued a public decree recognizing the existence of witches, declaring it heresy to believe otherwise, authorizing their persecution. Some scholars say this paved the way for the European witch hunt that spread fear and paranoia for centuries. An estimated 200,000 witches were tortured, burned, or hanged in Western Europe between 1484 and 1750. The majority being women, and that was just in the West. Today's show is dedicated to the men and women who were persecuted as groups, and these became known trials. In 1590, we had the North Berwick trials. It was the first major case of witchcraft in Scotland. More than 70 people, including an earl, were executed. The story goes that in 1589, James VI of Scotland, who later became James I of England, was sailing to Copenhagen to collect his new bride, Anne of Denmark. But the storms were so severe that he was forced to turn back. The king blamed the storms on witchcraft, believing that a witch had sailed to the Firth of Forth to destroy his plans. Several nobles were implicated, including a well-known midwife, Agnes Sampson. They were all tortured and killed. The king would go on to establish royal commissions to hunt down witches. In all, Scotland would see around 4,000 people burned alive for witchcraft. And now we move to 1612, the very well-known Pendle witches. The Pendle witches were among the most famous witch trials in English history. The trials began when a young woman called Alison Device was accused of cursing a local shopkeeper who then fell ill. An investigation was launched that led to the arrest and trial of several members of Device's family, as well as members of another local family, the Redferns. In all, 10 men and women were hanged as a result of the trials. These Pendle trials would go on to be used as legal precedents to allow the testimony of children in trials of witchcraft. This would also be used in the Salem trials over in the States. I'm very excited to bring on international psychic medium, human design, Becca Francis, who's joining us from Australia, but born in the UK. And that's why we mentioned all the Western Europe, the European trials. So excited to have you on the show today, Becca.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you for having me. And that was a great introduction. You took me straight back to that time. I kind of zoned out a bit as I was listening. It was really, really hypnotic the way you describe it. I love it.
You know, I have to say, why I was reading part of it with the Pendle trials, I actually was hearing a woman saying next to me that they were never given the opportunity in that case to provide their true testimony. Mm-hmm. And many of those involved, they never had a voice. And I think it's so important, and why this podcast is being produced is to bring a voice back, partly to history, but also bringing the voice and making sure that we are all heard in this time so that this doesn't happen again, and to continue to bring in magic onto this earth, into this plane. And so again, I just want to thank you so much for using your voice along with mine to help others look deeper into themselves, want to search for answers and knowledge, and to know that they're safe there, and to bring healing the past. So I know that you were born in the UK, but where are you? I ask all the guests, where is your energetic, your light, that node on the planet? Where are you gridded at right now?
So I'm in Brisbane, which is on the east coast of Australia in Queensland. And we have been here nearly 20 years now. We made a very, me and my second husband had not been together very long at all before we made the decision to move here, with two very small children. And it was very much a gut decision. It was very much an intuitive decision, and one which has served us, one of the best decisions we've ever made. And we made it literally within about 5 minutes. We didn't deliberate over it at all. So this is where I am. But I must say, and I know we've spoken about this many times because you're in Charleston, the southern states of the US are, I feel like they're my spiritual home. The first time I visited New Orleans, and we did Mississippi, we did all of those, you know, those, this sounds, those states along the bottom, you know what I mean, the southern states. This is a UK Australian trying to describe that geographical location, but I just feel so at home. It's probably the most at home I've ever felt in my life was in those southern states. So I'm not surprised that you and I have made the kind of connection that we have, because it just feels otherworldly to me, that energy down there.
It really is. And we call that the deep South. So you're in the deep South when you're in those lower southern states. It gives you an opportunity to step back in I want to say into time when you're here. And as you and I both know, the veil is continuing to get thinner and thinner and thinner, and there's having more opportunities of what we would call bleed throughs. And you can be on the street in this very modern time, and when your intuition is high and the body is receiving, your extrasensories are open, you can hear and feel other energies around you. And one of my children, they're very connected and we are driving down in the downtown area of Charleston, and she could see horses and buggies right next to our car in the streets.
That's so fascinating. That's so fascinating to me, the way you describe it, because I remember that the first time we went to New Orleans, and we did a ghost tour. We always do that wherever we go, because we're both fascinated by it, but also because it's a good way to get to know the history of the place that we're in. And I remember we were taken to this place, which was a hospital. It was formerly a hospital. And I could see, I won't go into graphic detail, but I could see what had happened in and around this hospital. And I said to the woman that was running it, did this happen? Did that happen? Did that happen? She said, well, I don't know, but quite possibly because of this A, B, and C. I know I'm being very vague, but it was not very nice. So when you describe those bleed throughs, I remember that time specifically because I saw very clearly, it kind of stopped me in my tracks, kind of took me straight back down the timeline, and I was kind of there. And yeah, that's the first time I've experienced something like that in the deep south.
In the deep south, yes. There's still here in Charleston, there's still the dungeons. The original dungeons are still very active. One is part of a tour group, and the other, believe this or not, I'm like, you're not going to be shocked. it's they turn it into a restaurant. And so, obviously a multi-leveled restaurant. And since we've been here for about 10 years, it's on the 5th restaurant in that location. It continues to turn over and turn over. And I went there for the very first time, where they sat me down I was seated in the dungeon area. And at the time, I really did not know. I really honestly didn't know that's what it was. Because the dungeon was across the street, and that's where the tours were. And I had been in that dungeon and seen spirit there. And I was having dinner with a group of my girlfriends, and it came in waves. First, I was feeling the emotions of just a feeling of raw anger and being trapped and stuck. And just like we stated earlier, not having a voice. And then I could begin to see the clothing. And when I looked around the small restaurant area, it was just people stacked on people, just crouching on the ground and on the floor. There's no room. They were packed in like sardines, and I could see their clothing. And I was, like blocking it off. I'm here at the restaurant with my friends. I don't want to experience.
I'm just trying to eat my steak and drink my wine. Like, what's happening?
Correct. And they just kept on hitting me. When you're psychic, all of your clairs is what they call it, are open, and so they hit you at all your senses. And so then I started to hear them. Now I'm not going to go in detail what I was hearing, but at that point, that was enough where I had to stand up and run out. I had to run out because the emotions were so overwhelming. And when I stepped outside and got fresh air, I called my husband and I said, what is that? What is the history there? Because this is what I was just seeing. And so he looked it up and he said, Abby, that was actually the first original dungeon. And that's where everyone was held awaiting their trials. And I do know that there was at least one witch trial here in Charleston, and the woman was held in that dungeon.
Oh my goodness. How long did it take you to kind of recover yourself again after that?
And I'll tell you this too, for all the audience. So before I went back into the dungeon, I put up a lot of barriers and shields, and I asked archangels to come in and help to shield me because I wanted to finish my evening. So when I went downstairs, the minute I sat down, all the fire alarms went off in the dungeon, just in that dungeon area, not up, the upper levels, but just where we were seated at. All of the fire alarms went off for no reason. There was nothing happened, but everyone had to get up and leave. It actually took me a couple days because I had been working so hard to block out and shut out all of that energy that it really depleted my physical body doing that. And so the audience knows, no, I wasn't drinking that evening. That evening. So it wasn't the alcohol that made me tired. So I was the designated driver for all my friends. But yes, it took me a couple days to recover from that. But yeah, this world that we live in, and it's existing all around us. And that's why, we want to do this podcast to bring in and show people that these abilities are they're not to be feared. It's just another form of communication and interacting. And I would love to know, I look at it as being very magical. I would love to know for you, when did you first have the inkling or the notion that you were tapped in or had extrasensory abilities in your life? Can you remember that?
I can. So I was saying this to somebody just yesterday, actually. Ever since I can remember, I've been terrified of the dark. That's where it started, much to my sister's annoyance, because I always used to have to sleep in her room. And I would always see things at the corner of my eye, or I'd feel things, or I just knew that there was something more than the 3D world that I was seeing. But it really wasn't until 2015. So I was on my honeymoon. So I married my second husband on my honeymoon, and we were supposed to be going to Napa for the night. We were doing a tour of the West Coast, supposed to be going to Napa, and we changed our minds at the last minute, and we decided to rent a tent cabin in the middle of the redwoods. And if anyone knows me and my husband, we are the kind of 5-star fluffy towels, like high thread count sheet type of people. We are not campers at all. So anyway, we end up in this tent cabin in the redwoods, which was beautiful, but it was eerie. Like, it was very, very eerie. Anyway, to cut a long story short, that whole night, I laid awake. I could hear gunshots. I could hear screams. I could hear ambulances, babies crying, people shouting, what sounded like people fighting. And I laid there frozen with fear the entire night. My husband didn't move, didn't wake up. I just laid there the entire night, eyes wide open, terrified, thinking there's something awful happening. So the next morning we get up, my husband hasn't heard a thing. There's nothing happened, at reception in the park. There was nothing on the news. And that really shifted my perspective of this 3D world, because my husband said, I've no idea what you're talking about. Like, I didn't hear anything. And he's a light sleeper. That shifted a lot of things for me. And I think it was because once I'd found this really incredible relationship, I felt safe to be able to open up. And suffice it to say, I didn't even stay in the cabin the next night. I slept in the car on my honeymoon. Like, my husband tucked me in to the car. He slept in the cabin and I slept in the car. Anyway, since that time, things have just accelerated for me. I started to hear more things. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see spirits stood next to the bed. I started to see them in more and more and more detail. And it just went from there. One of my dogs passed away and I started to see him at the corner of my eye, like actually see the color of his fur and the top of his head. And that's when I started to explore learning more about this, because I felt kind of muddled and lost and overwhelmed because I didn't know what to do with it. So, and here I am.
So I think so many people question, I know that I get this a lot in this work, and I'm sure that you do as well. So I'm going to ask you, when you saw your pet in spirit, how did that make you feel when you begin to see outside of our perception, this 3D eyed perception? How did that make you feel?
That's a great question. I actually felt, oh, well, this is the way it's meant to be. I felt at home. I felt like, oh, there it is. A feeling that I couldn't put my finger on my entire life. I just couldn't describe it. I couldn't put my finger on it. When I started to see him, I connected that feeling to him. It was like, let me try and articulate this. It was like, oh, of course I'm seeing him. Of course, this is how things are meant to be. It wasn't, I don't get scared when I see spirit. I just think, oh, okay, well, that's how it's supposed to be. How beautiful that they're here. How lovely that they trust me enough to show themselves to me. How lucky am I that I've been able to see these things in my lifetime. I just feel really, just peaceful. This is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That makes
Thank you so much. And from my experience, I had something very similar. It wasn't the first time, but we lost one of our fur babies a few months ago. And I walked across the kitchen and I looked into the dining room where my kids always sit and study. And as I was just walking across, I looked in, boom, there was our Wally. And he was just sitting curled up underneath my son's feet, just like he always was, just sleeping peacefully. And then it was honestly, it was about a 2 week period. Everyone in the whole house, we just kept seeing him. My husband was outside grilling at the barbecue, and he opened up and he looked down, and Wally was just standing right there sniffing like he always did. The drip that comes off the side, and he was just standing there sniffing like he always. And then another time, my daughter looked out the back glass door and she could see we have a lot of foliage in the back. And his favorite thing to do was to jump around in that. And she saw him just outside having a heyday, still doing what he always did. And it's brought all of us so much comfort of there is no such thing. He's not gone.
Yeah.
He's still very much so here. He's just outside of our perception.
Absolutely. Oh, you made me so emotional. But it's interesting that this is the turn almost, or direction our conversation's taken, because animals are huge for me in the work that I do. I know I shared this with you before, that very often when I'm doing a mediumship or a psychic reading, an animal that the client has owned previously that has passed over will be the first spirit to come in. And sometimes it turns into an animal communication reading, but more often than not, this animal will just come and curl up kind of by my feet. And they let me know it's for comfort. Like, tell them, like it's a comfort for the rest of the session, particularly if a client's never had a mediumship reading before, and it immediately kind of opens their heart. And I was doing a platform event the other day, actually, and I brought through this this boy. He was around 10 or 11, and he was telling me that he's a proxy. And he said what that means is that when animals pass over, particularly dogs, he said, dogs are my specialty. I look after them in place of their owner till their owner crosses over. I am that owner's proxy. And he was saying to the client, that's my job. It's amazing. And I have all these dogs and there's so many and they're so hard to control, but that's the job that I've been given. I'm this proxy. So that connecting with, that animal energy has really opened up new things for me, new things that I can see. I start to see what happens when people pass over, and very often it involves pets. So it's interesting that's the direction that we've taken.
Spirit always shows up and leads where it needs to. And as you were talking about that, I want to circle back to when you look at the witch folklore. So often most of them didn't live in the major like villages or the towns. They lived a little bit outside, and we're often seeing them being very close with nature. And many of them were healers and herbalists, and that what quote unquote made them an outcast. But it's that connection to animals and to nature. And some people, will say, oh, when they look at animal totems or animal symbols, where when you're stepping into this world and looking through the veil, you see the energy behind the animals and behind nature. And it's just another form of communication, just like those pets come in and they're communicating calmness. And they're that beautiful bridge for you to go in and work with people to bring in healing. Because really at the root of all of this is healing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many of the men and women who were tried and persecuted, they were healers. And the people that were living in a very scientific world could not understand that type of a modality. And then so whenever we don't understand something, then we want to demonize it, or we want to bring fear around it. And I think one of our soul jobs, our soul missions being here, and I do want to get back to your soul mission, but is to bring in the magic and the woo and the healing in a very soft, non-fearful way of this is how it can be, and this is how it is.
Absolutely.
And I love the animals do that for you with your work.
Yeah, they do. They're everywhere all the time. I've had horses, I've had fish, I've had hamsters, I've had all sorts of animals. But it's interesting, just going back to what you were saying about the time that this all was happening and how people were pushed out of communities, or they lived outside of communities, and how they were kind of ostracized by the logical thinkers. Just linking it to human design, which is one of the things that I kind of teach and mentor with. You have your own human design chart, so you have your own personal chart, but there's also a human design of a span of centuries that's called the Global Incarnation Cross. And the Global Incarnation Cross is the background frequency that holds the planet together. And so, for instance, between 1615, which was just before the start of the witch trials, to 2027, we've been in what they call the cross of planning. And the cross of planning is very logical. It heralded the Industrial Revolution. It made people, it sent people into mental awareness. We're in a very mental, kind of logical state. And it created bargains. So if you do this for me, I will keep you safe. If you work for me on this land, I will give you this. So it was very loyalties, bargains, agreements. So as soon as that Incarnation Cross arrived in 1615, anything outside of that, anything that was spiritual or emotional or not logical, was seen as a threat. And when we were looking at doing this podcast, and I was doing some more research into the actual dates of the witch trials, they line up almost perfectly with the start of the cross of planning. And that cross of planning was about community, like creating these communities. So anything that was outside that community was ostracized. And also to create communities and to create control and governmental structures, the government needed to own the land. So very often these women were ostracized and their land was taken from them because the control of the government or the organization that was overseeing these new communities needed to control the land. So they were ostracizing these women and making them other. They were othering them and pushing them away from these communities. So when you see how that works with this global cross, you can see why, or part of the reason why this sudden shift happened around the 1600s, like around 1615. And then in 2027, we're moving into completely the opposite energy. We're moving into the cross of the sleeping phoenix, which takes us from mental awareness to emotional awareness. So it's very much going to move from this community energy, which in some ways has served us, but is starting to crumble. We can see the structures around us starting to crumble, particularly the governmental structures. And we're going to be called upon to rely on ourselves, to go inwards, to be our own authority, rather than relying on external authorities. So it's just interesting to see how this background frequency, I feel, has played into the way that women were treated and the way that women were ostracized, because it served a purpose to build communities. I'm not saying it was the way you should build a community, but for the people that were building the community, it served the purpose of land grabbing, basically. So I just thought that was really interesting when I was researching it, like how it affected how the global Incarnation Cross affected what happened. And then ever since then, we've carried in our DNA as women this suspicion of each other, because women were turning other women in because they were fearful. So to protect themselves and protect their family, they're turning other women into the authorities. And I've seen this witch wound or sister wound throughout my life, and I know I've expressed it to you as well. It wasn't until I really met you and some other people that we know in this industry that has really started to heal that sister wound or that witch wound. So I could go on about this forever. I just think this.
Well, no, I love it. I want you to go on forever. A question that I have is, because we're moving into this new generational cross of the sleeping phoenix,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that's why so many people are awakening?
Mm-hmm.
I would say in the past 10 years, there's been a huge shift of people coming in to who they are and into their soul mission. And all of the awakening is it's their awakening within.
Mm-hmm.
And so is this it's the forerunner leading up to 2027, so that when we get there, there are those of us who are there to help even more people coming into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So these energies are already starting to affect us. They've been affecting us for decades, although it's February 2027 when it really starts, that cross of the sleeping phoenix. So that's part of the reason we've seen structures start to crumble. It's the reason why when we were, years ago, we were taught to rely on external authorities. Now, a lot of us, just by questioning, well, do external authorities know better than me? That's how some people are starting to awaken. I know my husband, particularly, I can see that in him. He was very reliant on external authorities and had a lot of faith in government structures. And now he's almost the complete opposite. And he's starting to trust his intuition. So when the last of us that were born before 2027, when we have left, when we have all passed, the world will be a very, very different place, because the children that are born from 2027 onwards are emotional based. They're not mental based, they're emotional based. So they have a lot of emotional awareness. And it's up to their parents to be aware of this if they're open to it, so they can parent in a way that doesn't disconnect their children from their emotions, because that's how they're going to thrive. That's how they're going to survive. And without getting too deeply into it, there is one of the gates in the human design chart, gate 55, that is actually undergoing a mutation as we speak. So that will make these children that are born after 2027 in their emotional awareness and in their, what do I think? Not who am I relying on, but what do I think? What is my intuition telling me? So yes, in answer to your question, I do think that's part of the reason that people, even in the last few years, the last 3 years, have started to kind of wake up and go, maybe I do know better. Maybe I don't need to rely on what people are telling me, because the messages I'm getting are all so mixed. I can't discern what's the truth and what isn't. What am I left with? Well, I'm left with myself. So yeah, I think that the cross of the sleeping phoenix is already, and has been for a long time, had an effect on our emotional bodies, our physical bodies, our energetic bodies. Yeah.
I find that so interesting, because in a lot of the healing sessions that I've been doing recently, and please tell me if you're experiencing the same, is behind my client, I will see a figurehead, a grandmother, a great grandmother, and then standing behind her, it's, boom, 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 boom. And the booms are people. And it's all, and it's a tunnel going all the way back. And they're just the ancestors. It's the bloodline. And maybe it's the full female bloodline. And with the message of, you are here now to break the generational, I don't want to say curses, but the generational trauma. You're here to heal that. And I've received often from those ancestors that when the people here now, when they heal themselves, they are healing the entire bloodline going all the way back. Are you seeing the same thing and getting those same messages? It lines up with what you've been talking about with the human design.
Yeah, it's interesting the way it happens for me, because I do a lot more healing through mediumship rather than specific healing sessions. But often a grandmother and a mother, if they're in spirit, will talk about, and I have their daughter, for instance, as the client, they'll talk about the fact that they'll draw a line from them through their female bloodline, their matriarchal bloodline, straight through to the person that I'm talking to. Because I do get a lot of clients that either want to do this work or are just stepping into this work. And I can't tell you how many messages I've had from their mothers, their grandmothers, even their great grandmothers, that they wanted to do this work, but it was hidden and they didn't feel safe stepping into it. But they're encouraging the person that I'm reading for to step into it. And that's always that female bloodline. So that's how it shows up for me.
I would love to know, for you personally, is your abilities, is this inherited in your bloodline?
Yes, it is. So my maternal grandmother, Emma, she's one of my spirit guides and was she's around all the time. In fact, I'm wearing one of her rings today. That's interesting. And my mum was like, when I remember when I was little, my mum always had like crystals. She always used to put crystals in my dad's pocket to keep him safe. Or when my daughter was born, she had a health condition and my mum was calling on her friends to do some distant healing for her. And I just accepted that as, oh, that's normal. And then all of a sudden, when I stepped into this work and tried to talk to my mum about it, she shut down. She shut down and wouldn't talk about it, and is still very reticent to talk about it, which I kind of find confusing. And my daughter as well has it. So my daughter's wife will always say to me, Charlotte knows things. Like, she just knows things. Like, I don't know, she's doing her weird witchy woo-woo thing again. She's like you, like she just knows stuff. So yeah, I can see it through that whole bloodline. Yeah.
Yeah, it's people often say that a medium doesn't just spring up within a family, within a bloodline. But I would like to segue just for a minute, because we're using this word human design, and just for the audience who's listening to this, what is human design?
So I'm going to make it very simple, very, very simple. So it's really a way of looking at energy. And it was the first type of energy work that was brought to me. So we take your time of birth, your date of birth, and your place of birth, and it creates what we call a body graph. And there's 9 energetic centers. So you're able to see how your energy works, how you receive downloads, how you make decisions, what your potential fears might be. And you're able to see it actually mapped out in a body graph. And there's a lot of different modalities that have all come together to create this system. So there's the chakra system, the tree of life, Kabbalah, the I Ching. There's lots of different modalities that have been brought together to create this. But for me, I like it because it shows me how someone's energy works. And so when I'm working with them, say if I'm teaching them, say if I'm mentoring them for mediumship, when I look at their human design chart, I can immediately see, oh, okay, so maybe they're a non-sacral type, like you're a projector. The way that I would set up mentorship for you is very different to the way I would set mentorship up for a generator. I'm a generator, so I can go, because I have consistent access to sacral energy. So it really just provides a map. It provides a map of your energy, how you work, and has you understanding that it's okay to be different from other people. So for instance, you and me and a group of our friends were all together a month or so ago for a few days, and one of our friends is a manifester, and she physically needs, after a day with people, she physically needs to sit away from people just so that she can protect her energy and refuel herself. So she would sit at the end of the table, kind of away from us. But because I understood, okay, she's a manifestor, this is what she needs to do, it wasn't an issue. And she said, this is the first time that anyone's actually understood why I just need a bit of physical distance after I've spent all day with everyone. So it's really, it just gives you a map. It gives you a better understanding of somebody and the way they work. And particularly in my relationship with women, it has been really helpful because I always had very, very difficult, toxic relationships with women. But understanding their human design gives me more compassion for the way they are if they're different to me. And I guess finally as well, nobody likes being labeled. Oh, don't label me as this or label me as that. But when I found human design, I actually enjoyed the label of generator. I enjoyed that because it showed me that I wasn't crazy, that all the hustling I was doing was actually part of my energy. Because I would look at other women and go, oh, to be successful, I should be more like that. Like I should be more like Abby, or I should be more like Lisa. That's the key. And now I'm like, no, I'm a generator. I work differently, and there's beauty in that difference. So that's a very kind of condensed version explanation of human design.
No, it was very easy to follow. Thank you so much for that. And why I was listening to explain that, I was taken back to your original comment about how these parents need to understand these kids coming in for this next phase. And I see how human design plays into that. Would you encourage parents to find out the human design of their children? Would that make their life easier?
Absolutely, 100%. My children are 25 and 27 now, and I wish I had known this when they were younger. But I see it in my grandchildren. So one of my grandchildren is a manifestor, one is a manifesting generator. Their energy is completely different. So when my grandson makes statements, like he'll make statements to my daughter and her wife and say, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to do this. This is how it's going to work. If she didn't know he was a manifestor and didn't know that was the way he communicates, he informs, then she would push back on that. And she'd be like, no, we're not doing that. Don't be ridiculous, la, la, and push back and tell him no. And it's not that she tells him yes all the time, but she can understand, okay, I get what he's doing. He's informing, this is what he needs. Whereas my granddaughter is a manifesting generator, she will talk like 10 to the dozen, and she's like a whirlwind. She's like, Manny Gen energy is like Tasmanian devil energy. She's like everywhere, literally. Like I'll be on the phone to my daughter, and my granddaughter will be like pushing a high chair in the background, like across the room, like pushing. She's just like a whirlwind. So all that to say, to be able to understand how your child makes the decision by looking at their human design chart is gold. Because there are 7 different ways of making decisions in human design, and we all have a different one. So for example, I'm an emotional generator. So when I was in kind of people pleasing energy, trying to make everyone like me, if someone asked me a question, I would jump in and say, oh yeah, I want to do that. Whereas I make decisions through my emotional wave. So I need to follow the ups and downs of my emotional wave and come to a clarity before I tell someone what my decision is. Whereas I was speaking to someone yesterday who was a splenic projector. And splenic authority is very in the now. It's like they immediately know. I know what I want. I don't need to wait to make a decision. I can trust myself. I know. So again, if I'm teaching somebody and they're a splenic authority, if their knowing is how they make decisions, very often then their inner knowing will be how they first connect to their mediumship or their psychic abilities. So yes, even if you don't learn anything else about your children's human design, understanding what energy type they are and how they make decisions will change the game with parenting. because your child will feel understood rather than trying to make them fit into this homogenized way of behaving or communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. So I have two Manny Gens for my children, and I have
Yeah.
one projector. And with my Manny Gens, I know that really I just have to stand out of their way.
Yeah, you get run over.
I really, absolutely. I just have to give them as much loving support and say, just come to me when or if you need anything. Other than that, I know that they have it. I just keep them fed and clothed.
Yeah, keep them fueled up and
Yeah.
keep them looked after, and they'll do their
They do
themselves.
the other thing.
Yeah.
But in regards to, so my youngest is a projector and I'm a projector. And so we move energy very similarly. We're only 10 days apart in our birthdays. So we're both Pisces. So we work very, very similar. But my husband is also a Manny Gen. And so this can help out people's marriage as well by knowing your human design. Because now that we know I'm a projector and my husband's a Manny Gen, in the beginning, he was getting frustrated with me all the time because I would verbalize all these ideas, but then I wouldn't generate with them. Where, because he's a Manny Gen, so he verbalizes and he does, and he's again a Tasmanian devil, and so he would get frustrated with me. But you understand, as a projector, my energy gets lost in the details by trying to do that generator energy. And so I have been working on manifesting a generator into my life to help. But this can help marriages. I mean, just relationships so much, just understanding it.
Yes, it can help massively. So, for example, I have in my design, I have an open head center. My husband has a defined head center. So what that means is my husband has he asks very inspiring questions. Like if there's something on the news and he doesn't agree with it or he's questioning it, he will go, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, he will go on this rant. And these rants can go on for kind of 10 minutes sometimes about what he thinks about this and why is that person doing that. And he will explore all the facts and he'll verbalize it, and that's how he processes mentally. I am an open head center. So what's happening there is he is dumping, without realizing, all of those facts and that pressure in my open head center. I'm feeling the pressure to process it and to come to conclusions quickly. And I can't. It's too much energy for me. I'm like, oh. So before I knew that, I would just think, for goodness sake, like, stop. Like, I can't form opinion. At the end of it, he'd say, and what do you think? And I'd be like, I don't know what I think. And I don't know. But now we know that. I let him have his rant, and then I say, okay, that's a lot. You know how I'm designed. That's a lot for me. I'll need to process that. So even that, understanding that has helped our relationship massively, because I'll just let him do his thing. That's how he moves energy. But I can't let him put pressure on my open head center to be the same way. And that if I know that about myself, I can say, okay, I don't need to form an opinion about this right now. It will come. So for us, that's helped massively.
It's all I've heard from this entire show so far from you is animal communication, mediumship communication, human design communication. Number one, the main word being communication, but in all of these modalities, it's helping to make people's lives easier. And more in a place of comfort, and not so much friction in there. And when we circle back to the intent of looking at how in the past these were persecuted. These people were persecuted for doing things that were trying and attempting to make people's lives easier and more calm. And it gets me, I'm still mystified by that happening, and just wanting people to come with that open heart and mind to see the possibilities of some things that have just been labeled evil or demonic or I boggles my mind.
Yeah, it does. And thank you for sharing that. I think it boggles your mind because it doesn't make sense. And I think the reason it doesn't make sense is that when we moved into the cross of planning, the powers that I learned this off somebody else, the powers that were, not the powers that be, let's call them the powers that were, didn't want us to be peaceful, didn't want us to be communicating, didn't want us to be sovereign beings. They wanted us to be dependent because they wanted to build these communities. And I don't think that they were all doing it out of malicious intent, but this background frequency was having them kind of panic and go, we need to build these communities. So we need to homogenize everyone and make them the same. We don't need free thinkers. Free thinkers don't come to work every day and tend the land. They don't harvest crops. They don't do any of those things when we tell them to, because they're free thinkers. We don't need that. We need to disconnect people from that so that they can work for us, so we can create these companies and cities and bring this industrial revolution, which had benefits. You know, I'm not kind of all or nothing. I'm not I know the benefits of the cross of planning. I can see that, but I also know that there was factors at work that have means that we ended up where we have now. A lot of us completely disconnected and not trusting ourselves. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I do believe the entire globe is underneath a massive mental health crisis right now.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that we're seeing as well, when you talk about how the systems were created to I'm just going to say, I mean, the Industrial Revolution really pushed that out and started to change the education system. But you need to produce 9-to-5ers that aren't the free thinkers. But we're now starting to see, at least here in the States, and I would imagine for you as well, that this process is not working with these kids anymore. The children are failing within it because, again, their energies, these enlightened souls coming to this planet, they cannot exist in the old system.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see massive upheavals of things that just doesn't work in these frequencies any longer.
No, absolutely not. And just kind of looping back to what you said about the 9-to-5, when I understood human design and I was still in my corporate job as a manager, knowing what design my staff were was just such an eye-opener. Because if I have a projector who's a non-sacral type and a manager, and we've already talked about how different they are, I can't expect those two people to work in the same pattern. You know, for projectors, working a 9-to-5 is a complete anathema. It's like, well, I need to rest during the day, but when I work deep. Like I go into these deep cycles of work, but I also need cycles of rest. 9-to-5 can't possibly support that. So we're never going to get the best out of people by, you know, homogenizing them into this 9-to-5, but it suits the agenda for bigger corporations. But I agree, people are starting to see that that's not a healthy way to live. You know, I can see it in my son. When he left university, I said to him, don't get trapped in a job. If that's not what you want, think about it. Like, I didn't think about it when I left college. Think about it. And now he's off traveling around Europe. He's in Prague at the moment because he gave up his job, went to the UK, and he's been in Europe for the last few months. So I would encourage that in kids. You know, if my kids were younger, I was always saying to them, don't get trapped, because a 9-to-5 is not what you want to get trapped in. So think about it and encourage them to think about what their options were, rather than these external authorities telling them what they should be doing for the rest of their life.
And feeling into it, feeling in and listening to the body. How does that feel when I'm confronted with this option? So, and trusting as well, Well, I want to thank you so much. We've covered so much information. How can everyone at home, I really do encourage everyone, get to know your human design. It makes life so much easier. Just understanding how your mind and your body works and your energy works. How can they get a hold of you and get their human design session?
Okay, so very easy. My website's beccafrancis.com. All of my sessions and courses are on there. And you can drop me a DM on Instagram at the Becca Francis. I'm always in and out of my DMs. So that's the quickest and easiest way to chat. And just reach out if you have questions. I'm always happy to chat. Human design, mediumship, psychic, or all combined. That's my happy place when we put them all together.
Yes, absolutely. And mentoring as well. You mentor as well. So when you can combine all of those tools that you have together into a mentoring program, it's so helpful.
Yeah,
So helpful.
absolutely.
Well, thank you
Thank
so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. And to close out, the ashes going higher, the smoke filling the sky. Oh, you didn't see my ancestors coming for me behind. As you light the flame of fear, burning away the inner voice rumbling near. Oh, you thought turning us to dust. We lay at the ground, burying your lust. But a fire burns in our blood, memories drum through our veins. We are the burnt witches returned, the ones you thought you burned away. But our voices rise together in echo from a deep place you know. Our hearts, they do not tremble. We've come to awaken and help you grow. Thank you for tuning in to Burnt Witches. To re-listen to today's episode or to catch any other shows, please go to host Abby Lynn's website at abbylynn.co, where you can also find merchandise and other recordings. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you around the fire for the next one.